Hey there, this is Dennis Anyone. It's a podcast about making things up and making things happen. I love creative people, and I think art and creativity make the world go around, make tough times bearable, get us through challenging times, and so I love talking to people that do that. And today my guest is a writer. His name is Brian Sonia-Wallace. He's a poet, and he's also written a book about his life as a poet called The Poetry of Strangers. And part of how he makes his money and makes his way in this world is being what he calls a rent poet, which is like a rent boy. But he will go, it started off, he would go to like a street fair and put up a sign that says, you know, let me write you a poem and you could pay me what it's worth. And he would have his typewriter and his little outfit. And it grew into like a business that he does for corporations at different events. It's taken him to the Mall of America. It's taken him to this residency on Amtrak trains, and that's what he writes about in his book. And I love that idea of like these personal poems and the way people would open up to him, and the way he writes about it is really beautiful. And as I was reading the book, I was like, this is a good man. I was just really struck by the quality of his character and the way he comes across in the book. So I was very excited to talk to him. I cry a lot in this one. And sometimes for longer than normal. And he writes me a poem at the end. So it's beautiful. And he also is doing that for people by commission. So if you want to have a poem written for somebody for a Christmas gift, you can do that through Brian. So very cool. All right. Before we get to the interview, though, I want to remind you that this podcast, Dennis Anyone, is brought to you by me, pretty much. I do it because I love it. But if you want to support it, help me cover my expenses, you can do that in two ways. You can go to DennisAnyone.net, and there's a virtual tip jar there. You can leave me a tip. It's a way of saying you like the podcast. I also have a thing there called Buy Me a Coffee. So you can buy me a cup of coffee, and it always makes my day. And then the other thing you can do is consider becoming a subscriber to Derek and Romaine Studios. I'm part of a group of fun queer shows all under the Derek and Romaine crazy podcast universe. And for a monthly fee, you get my show early, and you get all these other really fun shows. So check that out at dnrstudios.com. I also want to get a plug-in for the Mismatch Game. Our holiday show, Glad Tidings, is coming back to the LA Gay and Lesbian Center's Renberg Theater on December 21st at 8 p.m. Learn about that at lalgbtcenter.org or find the ticket link on my Instagram. All right, here now is the interview with Brian Sonia-Wallace. Joining me now from Los Angeles, it's Brian Sonia-Wallace. He's the author of The Poetry of Strangers, What I Learned Traveling America with a Typewriter. I just finished reading it. I loved it. And I'm excited to talk to you about your work. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dennis.
So we met through my friend Stephen Rains, who is also a writer and a poet. And we did a little homework session together like a week or two ago. And we talked about your book, and I picked it up, and I fell in love with it. So I'm really excited to talk to you about the book, but also your work as a quote-unquote rent poet. But before we get into that, I want to bring up something I just saw on your Instagram feed. You were in Washington, D.C. for the AIDS quilt ceremony at the White House. What was that like?
Oh, it was freezing. It was very cold.
Right. So it was actually at the White House grounds, and the president and the first lady both spoke. What happened?
Yeah, it was on the lawn of the White House. It's actually the first time. The AIDS quilt obviously has been going forever, and it's the sort of longest running community arts project in the world. And for the first time, they had segments of it on the lawn of the White House displayed, and there was something really powerful about watching Joe and Jill Biden walk through the AIDS quilt to get up to the podium to speak and really talk about, where we're at in the fight against AIDS in terms of policy, and also what they're doing to try to, cement that legacy for the next 5 years so that it doesn't all go away. So it was a really inspiring thing to be there, and really felt like saying goodbye as well. I kept having the One Last Time, that song from Hamilton, running through my head and going, right. Yeah, God, imagine, being that guy.
No, but also it's the fear and the dread of what's coming or what might be coming, along with, just the importance of the quilt itself and all of that legacy. What struck you about being there? Did anything surprise you about the way it felt?
I mean, it brought up a lot. I was I'll give my age away. I was born in '89. And to have the death years on the quilt, and it's all, 91, 92, 93, and this sense of like the history that happens when you're too young to remember it,
right.
And things that you're sort of alive for but not present for
right.
in that way. And I've been working for the last 3 years with APLA Health, who actually the APLA, which is AIDS Project Los Angeles, their writers group was started in 1989. And I've been helming it for the last 3 years and getting to know a bunch of the clients, getting to work with people on creating storytelling and really thinking about, particularly in the context of that epidemic, like how do you continue storytelling and fundraising and doing this when there's, not a cure, but it's something that is people live with long, healthy and fulfilled lives. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And so it's
people still need help.
I think now around everything is always fighting for our attention and fighting to be the most urgent thing, know? And there's something really beautiful to thinking about the ways that evolves and changes over time. Before we went to the White House, we went to the new African American History Museum, which has sort of a walk through tour of the history of slavery and segregation and civil rights and, that experience in this country. And so to really think about the way when we talk about sort of quote unquote, a more perfect union.
Yeah.
Union between who and what does that look like? And it's ironic in a way because the book Poetry of Strangers came out of the first Trump presidency.
Yeah.
In a sort of surprising way where I was doing all of these kind of odd, like quasi-corporate poetry residencies in the Midwest. I was at the Mall of America. I was on the Amtrak trains. And so the publisher reached out to me and said, hey, this is sort of interesting. Do you think you have something to say about kind of the state of the country and who we are as a people from this vantage point of interviewing people one-on-one thousands of times, just about what's important to them without having a political agenda, but with the explicit prompt being, what do you need a poem about? And the original title, so for books at that sort of level, you have authorial control over everything inside, and the publisher absolutely chooses the cover and the title because that's the marketing portion.
Right. They've got to sell it.
She had originally wanted to call it Dust Bowl Nation, which is kind of interesting. And this sense of impermanence, this sense of people leaving and going from one place to another, this sense of sort of anxiety around home and around belonging and around economics. And so that's kind of baked into that as well in an interesting way.
Right. I think I like the title better than what you guys have now, The Poetry of Strangers. So it talks about your adventures as what you call a rent poet. What exactly is rent poet? It's a twist on the term rent boy, which we all know. Well, my listeners do anyway. But yeah, talk about being a rent poet.
Well, this is the great irony, right? Is that rent poet, when it started off, it was supposed to be a 1 month sort of performance art challenge. I had gotten laid off and I'd busked poetry a few times. I'd gone out to the street and set up a typewriter and offered to write people poems for tips. And I'd always made, I'd do it for a couple hours, but I'd come home with like $50 an hour in tips. And I thought, that's not bad. I wonder if I could pay my rent for a month in LA with poetry.
Right.
And so the rent and rent poet also came from that first month challenge where I thought it was sort of, I liked the idea that what we're doing with art is we're sort of testing reality and we're saying, this feels very improbable. Is it possible? And in my mind, it was a little performance art piece on art and capitalism. I was going to do it for a month and then I was going to do other things.
Right. You were going to see how it goes. And you announced that you were going to do this in front of a room full of people on like a performance night and said, I'm going to do this thing where I'm going to try to pay my rent with poetry. And I guess there were more established poets that are going, good luck with that. I've been trying to do that for years.
Yeah, it was wild to see. And I mean, I think it's a big part of how I like to think and operate, which is you can't if you're in the room where everyone's doing the thing, then you're just another person contending. But if you're able to find your way into other spaces where no one's doing the thing, then all of a sudden it becomes kind of interesting. Like I just yesterday wrote a poem for the Long Beach airport, turned 100 years old. It was at Centennial, and they made a time capsule that's getting mortared into one of the walls of the old terminal, and it'll be opened in 50 years.
Wow.
And I've done, for a Valentine's Day, I've written poems on a typewriter for travelers and staff, and they said, hey, would you write something for the time capsule? And so I went and read that and kind of got to be part of that event. But there's such a beauty to the idea of poetry not being this sort of shut away thing, but being something that can really be active and present in people's lives, in institutions' lives. That's just the best way of telling the story. And I'm a little smug today because one of the news outlets came out with their story about it, and they had, 10 seconds of the airport director speaking and 10 seconds of the mayor speaking, and then the entire poem.
Right on. Yes. Yeah.
It's a way to give the feeling. It's a way to give the mood that I think so often we neglect in a way.
Yeah. It's funny you describe yourself as smug, because as I was reading the book, one of the things that struck me almost like within a couple chapters is this is a good man. This is a kind man. Like you never judge anybody. You're very open-hearted. Like it was kind of beautiful because as a reader, I'm like, oh, I can really take things in because because of the messenger. Like you're just a good guy. And it just comes through in the pages. And I bet that's why people open up to you and you can write their poems.
I think that's such a big part of the practice is like a very active practice of non-judgment.
Right. And you go into places like the Mall of America where people could be like, oh, the fonts are horrible. Like you could be that guy so easily and you're not. IHOPs and the Southwest Chief, which a train that I've ridden on many times because I have family in Arizona and I take the train home, and I love the Southwest Chief. But yeah, you're not snobby about anything in any part of the book, and I think it's really refreshing.
I think I am snobby. I think I have my judgments, and then part of the art is to be able to set those aside. And I just love the idea that I think we get really full of ourselves when we think about what is allowed to be art, like what is allowed to have a soul, Can an IHOP have a soul? And I think it's sort of like classist and shitty to say no.
Right.
Because that's a space that is so important for so many people. And I think one of the challenges of America is that and the world right now, honestly, we live in such an age of like replication and mass production, whether that's like Starbucks, McDonald's, or, the Instagram aesthetic that every coffee shop now has.
Yeah.
And so living against this kind of bland template, how do we create individual stories? How do we still lead rich and fulfilling and individualized lives? And I think we do.
Yeah.
Like I think that we can't not. And so that's the tension that I'm really interested in exploring is within the context of kind of kitsch Americana.
Yeah.
Look like to then say, okay, but this Minnesotan is like the descendant of Vikings.
Right.
And has a really deep hospitality culture. And, is a grandmother and comes and walks around the mall every morning because it's too cold to walk outside.
Right. The walkers of the mall. I didn't know about that subculture, and you write about them vividly. And, there are people that just go there to walk for years.
They have a whole program. They've gamified it. They have rewards. I mean, it's a serious culture. And it's a way that I think, especially in that community, that older adults are able to have a third space to go to and to socialize.
Yeah. So
that is unexpected and like that weird, like corporate, not even like corporate public partnership. Like, it's just like a weird thing that like this corporation was like, yeah, sure. People want to use our space for that. They'll buy a coffee. Come on in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked you in advance if you wanted to read a bit from your book about this. So maybe now would be a good time to do that if you're cool with it.
Sure. I'd love to.
Okay.
So I'll read a little bit. This is the passage I love reading the most, which is just the story of the first poem.
I love it.
The chapter is called The First Stranger. And it starts with a little epigraph from one of the poems, When you are grown, no part of you will be recognizable. Will you tend the garden of yourself? Do you dare brave the soil? I sat behind a borrowed Smith Corona manual typewriter with sticky keys at a street party in downtown Los Angeles. The year was 2012, and I had recently returned to California from college abroad, another unemployed millennial at the tail end of the financial crisis, looking for a purpose, but willing to settle for moving out of his parents' house. The pounding summer heat at the street party was broken by the shade of skyscrapers, glass citadels to wealth and power that towered over everyone. A new metro line had just been built in this car-powered city, and everyone was celebrating at the grand opening of the latest station. Naturally, to get there, I drove. Helicopter moms buzzed around their children. Paleteros called hielos and pushed ice cream carts, and a homeless man shouted himself hoarse and broke down on the street corner at all these people in his living room. LA was in the middle of a homelessness crisis, a gentrification crisis, a transportation crisis. LA was perpetually in the midst of these crises.
Yes.
Next to me at a DJ booth, powered by solar panels, Pharrell Williams' Happy was playing. I was nervous, palms sweating as I set out a Costco tray table and folding chair. Another birthday in my sputtering adulthood had passed, and I had a leftover length of blue wrapping paper that I made into a sign. Poetry store. Give me a topic, I'll write you a poem. Pay me what you think it's worth. Just a week before, I had heard a story on the radio about someone selling poems in a park, and with an invitation to do something at the street party and the yearning only a 22-year-old can have to make a good impression, I thought I might as well give it a try. What's the worst that can happen? I reasoned with my terror. No one stops, and I write poems for myself in public like a weirdo and go home. I've been a weirdo before, I can do it again. I took a picture on my iPhone of the typewriter and reluctantly put it back in my pocket, shoving down the urge to Facebook, to text, to be anywhere but here on the hot and crowded street corner, surrounded by strangers with an open invitation for any one of them to come up and talk to me. I idly typed on a piece of paper to calm my nerves. No sooner had I started writing than people drifted over, curious to see the typewriter and then bemused at the prospect of finding a self-proclaimed poet behind it. Do you need a poem? I asked them from under my newsy-style flat cap. I told myself over and over I was the character of the poet. If people rejected me, they weren't rejecting me, they were rejecting this character I was playing. But people stopped almost immediately. Old folks to reminisce over the typewriter, curious kids and their parents, couples on dates. I asked each of them the same question. Do you need a poem? I don't have any money, replied a buzz-cut Chicana woman with tattoos peeking out wherever clothing met skin. That's okay, I replied. About my dad, then. Her answer was instant. He was a long-haul trucker when my brothers and sisters and I were growing up, so he wasn't able to be around much. She drifted into stories of her dad, her family, reminiscing about her life and relationships to a complete stranger on the street while throngs of people passed. My dad would be gone for weeks at a time, but he'd do it to be able to send money home, she told me. I just want him to know that I understood, and that we loved him for it. She stopped and stood in silence. I wondered if this story was a weight she'd been carrying for a long time. My fingers struggled to muster enough force on the rusty keys of the typewriter in front of me to smash the tiny hammers into the ink ribbon and onto paper. I quickly discarded the 10-fingered typing we'd been assured in school was the secret to success and went back to hunt and peck. As I typed each line, the typewriter would skip ever perilously closer to the edge of the cheap TV tray table, threatening to topple off. I'd have to pause to wrestle it back, turn the knob, pull the carriage, start a new line. The C stuck. The spacebar skipped and left 2 spaces. Any hope I had at formatting the thing was gone. It would format itself. Thank you very much. My index fingers labored over the keyboard. Each keystroke was an exclamation of permanence. I didn't keep any pictures of the poems I wrote back then, so I'll never know what the first poem I wrote for a stranger said. I remember images of truck side mirrors, endless lonely roads buoyed by thoughts of family back home, the road itself becoming a vein through which blood flowed back to the heart. And I remember reading the poem to this fierce woman peeking up to see her eyes closed. It was a first draft, imperfect, riddled with the errors of a 60-year-old machine and a 22-year-old poet, but it was hers. At the end, she took a deep breath in, then opened her eyes to look at me. She took her poem, expression inscrutable. Wait here, she said, and vanished into the crowd. I moved on to write for someone new, a middle-aged woman in festive summer clothes who fawned over photos of her dog with me at the typewriter. But then the trucker's daughter reemerged from the mass and pressed a crisp bill into my hand. I had to go to an ATM, she told me, by way of explanation. Her tone was gruff, but I could see something had softened in her face. The trucker's daughter didn't look like she had much, but her $5 was much more than $5 to an unemployed kid looking for something to hold on to. It was an affirmation in this world bound by money and scarcity, this world where it's hard to find the words to tell someone how you feel, what you mean. She was sending me a message. What you are doing is worth something.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. I think it's so beautiful. The way you paint the picture and LA, and I've been to those kinds of events, and like this moment emerges from it. You go to different places with your Rent Poet enterprise, and I want to get into some of those specifically. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about how it works. When you do it, you have a typewriter. Do you always use the same kind of paper when you write a poem for somebody?
I have a couple things have evolved over the years. This is year 10 of doing it. So from thinking that it's going to be 1 month to having people go, oh, would you do my law firm company party? Would you do my anniversary party? And sort of building up this really book of private clients, which is how I mostly pay for stuff now, which is nice to not have to rely on just tips. But I have a couple typewriters that I usually use. I have a Remington 1 that I really like. That's like a very old classic, 1940s machine. Right. And Remington's kind of interesting because they were rifle factories.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they were but they had interchangeable parts and the ability to manufacture those. So it was rifles, like newspaper settings for type on newspapers, and then typewriters. And then I just got a cursive typewriter. I want to say it's a Skywriter that I've been using just because the font is kind of cool. And then I always use, and I think that this is its own poetic form, like a 3x5 or a 4x6 card.
Right.
The 4x6 cards are nice because it really is the size of a photograph. And I often think about a poem is a photograph in words, right? So I'm kind of giving you an emotional snapshot of where you are right now based on what you've told me, and trying to kind of see that and document that. It also means that, I'll reach the end of a line at a weird time because we're not used to writing on a piece of paper that's 4 inches long, and it creates a shape on the page that at some point I'm sure I'll do a little more academic work around saying, well, there's a sonnet and there's a haiku and then there's a typewriter poem, which exists little space and you can't backspace on it. So any word that goes in there, I'll repeat myself so often in poems, I'll be reading it out loud to the person after, and I'll go, well, I used that word twice.
Right. So you don't do you can't do any editing. It is just what comes out.
Exactly. Yeah. All the edits have to happen before you type, which in a way is so liberating. And the keys stick, the letters will come out wrong. Sometimes you have to X out entire words. And I love this idea of the mistake being part of the art. And I always remember in college, I didn't take the class. I think I audited an anthropology class, and they were talking about a specific group that one of their kind of beliefs is that perfection is reserved for the gods. And so every time they make anything, they will deliberately include at least one mistake so as to not piss off the gods, because they don't want to try to look like they're replicating the gods. And so I love that idea that the mistakes are like what makes the art human. Yeah,
they're features, not bugs. I think that's a liberating idea in anything that you do, because I have a lot of in my own life and other people where it's like, if it's not perfect, they can't do it. They won't put it out there. And it's like, you got to get over that. I think it's, it stops you short. You wear an outfit when you do these poems.
I have my one.
What is your outfit?
The first and most essential feature, I think, is a little flat cap, almost like a news style hat.
Yep.
It gives the era. It gives, in some ways, I really think about it as armor. And especially when I first started doing this, I didn't study poetry intensively academically. I was really coming to this as an appreciator, but as a layperson.
Right. You weren't like poetry is my thing always.
Yeah, I'd read a bunch of T.S. Eliot and Robert Frost and, you know, some Pablo Neruda and some like Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland stuff.
Right.
But I wasn't going to hold a dissertation on Emily Dickinson anytime soon.
Right.
But it let me kind of become this character of a poet. And this idea that when I'm doing this, there's a little bit of a divide between, and I admit this is maybe like a queer thing as well, which is the way that we compartmentalize the different sides of ourselves.
Right.
And to say, oh, this is the poet side of myself.
Right.
And so I'm showing up now as the poet. So I put on the hat. I have a vest now.
A little vest. Yep.
My mom in classic eccentric fashion became a weaver when I was in high school and made cloth. And so I have a vest that my mom wove the cloth for, which feels very kind of Middle Ages of her.
Yes, that's perfect. I think if you sat there in a hoodie and a T-shirt, it's not the same.
And it's funny because I'm hardly the first person to do this, right? There's probably 100 people who do this regularly across the country. And there's probably, 500 more who have done it once or twice or who've dabbled. And I always encourage people to really be intentional with the outfit and really think about the archetype that they're playing.
Right.
I have a friend, Poet Vincent, I think is his Instagram, who loves this idea that we kind of become this archetype when we write, that we lose our individual identities. And it's fascinating because I'll get people who say, oh, you wrote me a poem at the Hollywood Farmers Market in such and such. And I go, yes, I did. And in my head, I know, no, that was Jacqueline Suskin. I never wrote at the Hollywood Farmers Market. That was a woman who is 100 pounds smaller than I am.
Right.
And yeah, that was me too.
Right.
When we're doing this practice, it's all the same. And people will send me pictures. They'll be in London and they'll, see some of the London typewriter poets outside of the Tate, and they'll send me photos and they'll be like, were you just in Stuttgart or whatever? And I'm like, sure.
Yeah, might have been me.
Yeah.
I've never been a huge poetry reader, but something struck me as I was listening and reading your book. I listened to the audio. Poetry seems like a hard format to lie in or to bullshit. It doesn't seem like where you go if you want to lie in bullshit. I don't think you're going to be a poet, or I don't think you're going to ask for a poem. I think you want to capture something real and true.
There's definitely an openness to sincerity, to like an unironic, almost cheesy, people sit down at the typewriter and they start talking, and then inevitably at some point they're like, I didn't know this was going to be therapy. Ha ha ha.
Right.
Like, I just asked you what you needed a poem about.
Right. And there's not a lot of room for bullshit. There's an economy that says, get to the real stuff. Right.
Yeah, there's not space in the language, right? You can't. I mean, you can have style, you can have attitude, and some of the poems do, and people will want funny poems. Or
right.
I love. There was a little girl at a wedding I just did who was like, "Can you write me a limerick about a pug?" And I was like, oh, "Of course I can." Her mom was like, "Well, let him decide." I'm like, "No. She wants a limerick about a pug. Listen. To know what you want is a valuable thing."
Right. Exactly. What's the moment like when you read it to them? Are you nervous? Or have you, I'm sure at the beginning it was different than it is now. That moment you finish and here it is.
Now and then it so depends on the writing. And this is the whole thing. It's like creating 30 plays in an evening, and each of them lasts for 1 minute.
Yeah.
And there's poems that I write and I'm really proud of them. And there's poems that I write and I'm a little embarrassed by them.
Not my best. Yeah, I've had that with different things that I do with interviews. I'm like, not my best or whatever,
Right. And the funny thing is, like, it doesn't make a difference what I think of the poem. Like, people receive it the way that they need to receive it. Like, I think some of my worst poems have made people cry, and some of my best poems, people have been like, oh, okay.
Thanks.
Because it's the headspace that they're in when they're receiving it, right? And what they're choosing to use it for. I think where I get nervous is every now and then I try not to ever give people advice in a poem, because who the hell am I? I'm not qualified. It's not my place. But every now and then I'll take a risk, or I'll see something in a person and I'll be like, okay, there's a little bit of darkness here that I think this person can handle having reflected. And that's where I get nervous in reading the poems now, is when there's a moment where I'm like, oh, there's something serious here.
Right.
That were touching. There was another wedding I did this month where this guy was like, I want something for my mom. My sister just died. They were alienated. Now I'm living with my mom. We hate each other. What can you do?
Wow.
And I'm going to give it to her. And I'm like, okay, like I'll do my best,
right.
you know, we'll see what happens. But the beauty of it, I think, is that it's like the best cure for writer's block, I know, because I'm not having to direct traffic at all. People are telling me where to go, and I'm just trying to find the route there. I'm like an Uber driver for your emotions.
That might be the quote for the title of this podcast. When somebody tells you what they want, do you sit there and think for a minute, or do you just start typing?
Oh, I try to ask them follow-ups, and I try to start writing as they're speaking with the follow-ups.
Yeah.
And I try to keep them as much as possible, although sometimes I'll say, okay, I think I've got it, and like dive into the typewriter. But I think my best work is when people don't shut up and they continue to talk to me.
They just keep talking and you're like, type.
And I'm honestly, my friend Linda Ravenswood, who's a poet, says you're like a magpie. Because I feel like what I'm doing is I'm listening for the little gems in there, and I'm trying to pull their words, their images, whatever I hear, I'm like, that line works next, and then that line works next.
Right, turns of phrase and things that pop.
Yeah, I'm like DJing their conversation to find a poem like within the words that they've said.
Yeah,
and then adding an image or a metaphor or something from my own head.
Yeah,
but for the most, trying to find the poetry in that sort of everyday speech.
Are they mostly about the same length?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have because there was one point where you described sort of this, not a formula, but you like, I want something like this, something like this. I thought it was like, oh, that's a great way to kind of come at this task, I think. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, the formula that I use is 4 things to make a poem. Why 4? I don't know. But I think it can be helpful. I use this especially when I'm teaching, when people are sort of scared to get started. And I don't actively think about it this way, but I do think that it's true. I think to be a successful, on the spot commissioned poem,
right?
You want to have something familiar so people see themselves in it, something strange so that they're transported, so that they're defamiliarized a little bit, something beautiful so they know it's a poem. Give them a mountain, give them the ocean. We don't have to like stay in the gutter unless they really want to.
Right.
Which I think contemporary poetry is like, contemporary art in general is so like, we'll book beauty. And it's like, have some beauty. Why not?
Why not? What did beauty ever do to you?
Right. So something familiar, something strange, something beautiful, and a joke. So that the work doesn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah.
Because it's just been written. And I think that comedy and horror have kind of the most immediate visceral reactions.
Yeah.
You can always tell if you're doing it right. And so if you're able to make someone, cry with their poem, that's great, but that's up to them. But if you're able to make them laugh, that's another victory.
Right. And also laughter is involuntary. You can't, you know what I mean? Like it's such an honest thing. If somebody laughs, that's like an honest thing that's just happened. You mentioned the person with the really dark situation, the family stuff. Do you remember anything about the poem you wrote or how that person reacted?
I can find it.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Give me a second. I take photos of all of the poems. So yeah. I have it here. It was one of the last ones I wrote. It was in the sort of backstage speakeasy of a brewery.
Fun.
How's that for a context?
I love it. And while you're looking for that, I just want to point out, you mentioned people crying. You wrote in your book that you figure about 20% of the people cry when you read the poem or when they're telling their story or more when they're hearing it reflected back, I bet.
A mix, right? Yeah. Some people, it's not even the poem. Some people, it's just sitting down and having a stranger listen to them and care about what they're saying.
I think you write about this in the book. There is a need for people to be seen and heard. Maybe we've always had that as human beings. I'm sure we have. But maybe it's heightened now when we're not hanging out, when there's so much data and information. And I don't know. I feel like you're fulfilling a need. You write about it as poetry as a public service industry. And I think that is spot on based on the way you describe it.
I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy, who is I want to say director of public health for the national government for many years, has talked and written extensively about this idea of an epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah.
And the idea that as we live further from family, as we have smaller families, as we do more kind of urban living where people are on top of each other but not necessarily talking, as we live increasingly online, as the population ages with the baby boomers, all of these factors, as adolescents are like growing up on social media, all of these factors are contributing, I think, to a world where we don't necessarily have the sort of relaxed time together that we have had. And it's always, famously, it's hard to make friends as an adult and all of that.
Right.
But I think that, and even institutions, Rotary clubs and the sort of civic things that people would be part of that weren't particular interest groups, but we're just like, well, we all live here, so we're going to go to the whatever.
Third spaces, they call it sometimes in sociology, the place that isn't your home or your work, but you just go.
Right. All of those, I think, are on the decline. And so this is what's the book, Bowling Alone, right?
Yeah.
Thing of how do we create that? And I think for me, I'm an only child. And so I was very much used to and comfortable in some ways being by myself growing up, but also very aware that if I wanted to have interactions with people, I had to be intentional about that.
It was your job. I was the sixth of six, but all five of them were pretty much out of the house. So I had an only child feeling, and I'm like, oh, it's my job to connect or to reach out. It's not built in. I relate to that a lot. Did you come across that poem that we were talking about?
I've got it right here. So this is from this guy for his mom, who had just lost her daughter, his sister. They were estranged, and he wanted a poem to give her for Christmas. They are living together now again, and it's not easy. And that was sort of the information I had going in.
Right.
So this is for Mom from Vince. Remember the Christmas party? Our first outing in a long time. The holiday frame, the feeling of crisp air that this year will feel different. Each joy is tinged with memories that will not come again, but now living with you, I get to know you in new ways. The selflessness I try to remind you, take care of you too. Take pictures, cheesy holiday frames. No sense living in the could-have-beens. We are living together. Each year, not a party, but a memory. Christmas, a reminder. What gifts we are given and how long.
Wow. And I imagine him giving that to her and it being beautiful. Loaded, but beautiful and helpful, right? Do you hear from people afterwards about the life of the poems?
It's the coolest thing now, having been doing this for 10 years, to start having some of that legacy. So I just did a wedding for a guy who I wrote for him when he had just met his wife. And there's a club that he's a part of that has me come out once a year. Mm-hmm. And so once a year for 5 years, I wrote him a poem for their kind of evolving relationship as they join their lives. And then I got to go and write at his wedding this year and wrote them a sixth poem. Wow. And he had a six photo frame that he had for all of these poems. And they live side by side. And to get to see, the once a year check-in, you have your doctor's office check-in, and then you have your poet check-in. And you just sort of check the emotional health. Or there's a commission that I'm not late with yet, but I will be soon. I need to do it this weekend.
Right.
This woman reached out, and I had written a poem for her. I think they're married now, but they weren't when I wrote the poem. But it's an anniversary poem for her. And I'd written the original poem for her 5 years ago.
Wow.
And out and said, hey, I'd love to do another one. So it's been so cool to get to start to be part of these people's lives.
Yeah.
Through the medium of kind of being their personal poet, being the person they reach out to when they need something written.
Well, and they're the people you wouldn't normally know in your life. They're not all writers in literary circles in salons in Los Angeles. They're people at the Mall of America. And you write this story about one of your point people at the Mall of America when you got that commission, you know, corporate guy in the mall in Midwest or whatever. And at the end, you write him a poem in front of his colleagues, and he starts bawling.
You got it, Dennis.
Yeah. So what you must witness, the humanity that you must witness, it must be really meaningful, right? And from people that you wouldn't expect, people that become part of your lives that are like the guy that the first corporate guy that I think started hiring you was somebody that like that brings you back all the time, that has become something of a friend in your life, like people that you would maybe not normally interact with, right?
He does real estate, and I've written for all of his kids. They have poems in their rooms. I've stayed with his family in Arizona, gone out and visited them.
Yeah. And these are people that would not be part of your life were it not for this occupation or this part of your job, right?
I'm curious, what was going through your head when you were thinking about the story in the mall?
I've said this before on this podcast. It's hard to be a person.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it feels like it's getting harder, right? And so I don't know. I find it. And also all that stuff was in him, and it felt like a dam broke. And I think that's so beautiful, you know? And he did it in front of his people. And also the word bawling. Like, that's a thing. It's not like, oh, we got a little misty, you know? And then, you know, and then they maybe went to Olive Garden in the mall for dinner or whatever, you know, like it was the setting. There was a play in LA recently. It may have been on your radar, called Clarkston, about two gay guys that form a relationship and they're working the late shift at Costco. And the playwright, I didn't get to interview him, but he talked about like, he likes to find places of grace and spiritual themes that are unexpected. He goes, anyone can write a spiritual question at church, but let's do the late night shift at Costco. And that's kind of what resonates with some of the places that you go and some of the environments, whether they're like weddings or, you know, the Mall of America or, you know, a train on Amtrak, like just like the humanity of it, I guess, you know?
Totally.
I don't know. I'm an easy cry these days. But there's just something about the way that was described. And also he's standing there in the mall, right? This place that is not meant to be warm and fuzzy in that way, emotional. Mm-hmm. You know, he's not a yoga retreat. Right. And he's at work in a way. Yeah, I think that's really wild. Yeah. The Southwest Chief is a train from Los Angeles, and I think it ends in Chicago, an Amtrak thing. You won this, I guess it's a residency where you got to ride on Amtrak for a period of time. And the thing that moved me the most about that particular story was the friend you made with Oren, 95 years old.
Oh yeah, that man is dead now.
Yeah.
This was, I mean, or not, or he's 101.
He's 101. Well, also I was imagining him 95 being on his own on this train and getting around and managing. And he became kind of like your pal, and you wrote him a poem at the end. And that brought me to tears too. Like, just the way you write about it is very sweet.
I love this is again actually from my friend Vincent, poet Vincent, who talks about the idea of the traveling grace. His folks are pastors, but I love that idea that when you're traveling, and especially when you're kind of, I don't know, traveling as a vagabond, as a poet, there's a way of approaching the world that is unhurried and that is sort of easy, and that is very much oriented around seeing and responding to what's going on around you.
Yeah.
So like in that case, I came into, they call them roomettes, the little rooms on the Amtrak train.
Right.
And this guy was, this 95-year-old man is sitting on my bed.
Right.
And he couldn't find his room. And that was sort of the beginning of that friendship. He was across the hallway, and, you know, would make his way down, very stubbornly independent, wouldn't let me like hold his arm or anything, but he'd let me carry his like Civil War book.
Right.
So that he could stable himself on the train to get to the car.
Yeah, it's tricky. Even if you're, young and agile, like it's cramped and it's bouncing, and yeah, I get it.
We'd sit together in the observation deck, and he would nap, and I would have my typewriter, and I would write poems. And it's 3 days, it's 3 days on the train from LA to Chicago, and you really can get to know, and you're eating with people, you're sitting.
They put you, even if the dining room's totally empty, they'll put you with the people that are there. So you're hearing their stories. I remember once hearing a story on somebody in the dining car that I wanted to make in a movie. The woman had been a flight attendant when she was younger, and she had a friend that was also a flight attendant. And their hours had been cut, and they were broke, but they were still flight attendants. So what they would do is get up in the morning and decide, let's just go somewhere. They had flight benefits. So they would fly places just so they could eat and be some, you know what I mean? And they would take every food and and I just had the idea of like two broke flight attendants doing that and getting into some shenanigans. But that was a souvenir from the Southwest Chief on the Amtrak car. There's a chapter where you go to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and you are part of a friend's political campaign with some poetry, but also helping out. And it was so loaded for me to read because in the post of the election, it just resonated so much with like the efforts that we did to try to get Kamala elected. And how was your friend doing now? That was the candidate.
She's doing well. I should reach out and catch up with her. We follow each other and sort of see her things. She's an attorney. I met her when she was in law school, and then she was doing this, and I was traveling around the country, and I said, hey, if I stopped by Chattanooga for a few days, and it was right around the time of the election, and so we went door knocking, but then
what year would this have been?
This was 2018.
Okay, 2018 election, like the midterms, right.
Yeah, but really, really an inspiring thing, both to see kind of the human cost of that. Like, what does it mean to, and I think about it a lot in terms of when I started doing this typewriter stuff, I was like, there's a couple people who I need to get to know. Because I think what I'm doing is in dialogue with this. And one of the groups was hospital chaplains.
Interesting.
But one of the groups was also politicians. I was like, I think that there is an extent to which I am saying, allow me to be your representative.
Right.
Tell the story, and I'm not going to have a policy solution for you. That's not necessarily what I'm here for. Although we can talk about that on as a sidebar. But allow me to kind of carry this story for you a little way, and allow me to ask for your vote, right? To ask for your confidence.
Right. So you were seeing a parallel between what you were doing and what she was working to do. When Clinton was president, people always talk about how he had that "I feel your pain" thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. That was part of his appeal, and they'd always say, "Oh yeah, he feels your pain." But you also write about how being a politician, always having to be on in that way, it can be disorienting for a person, and I like the way you wrote about that too. So it was just loaded to read about during the election. I was like, is she going to win? Is she going to pull it off? Is it, and I won't give away what happens, but it was an interesting place to be, and especially at this time. You write about going to Salem, Massachusetts and hanging out with witches and doing poetry in different events and kind of like what you do. But you said that it was a place that your queer identity kind of emerged. Can you talk about that a little bit, about how that place brought up these feelings?
Yeah. So this is another class of people that I thought, oh, what I'm doing is kind of like this. I should see what these people are doing, was tarot readers.
Yeah.
And so my friend Eowyn Evans, Holy Crow in Massachusetts, is a really incredible tarot reader, but also like a circus kid, a carny, a hustler, a jewelry maker. I mean, it's fascinating to see the ways that people on the certainly like the margins of the economy, we'll call it, make a living, which is what I'm doing. But also people on the margins of society in other ways. So she really, a big part of her not necessarily the public facing stuff, but under all of it, was running, she called them the Witch Punks with an X, and it was sort of a trans witch collective, and working with all of these young folks who were, in various stages of sort of discovering and realizing trans identity, and help them kind of, develop business skills, develop side hustles, make sure that they're employed, make sure that they're housed, make sure that they have a community of people like them, make sure that they know what's going on in terms of the latest in medical science around that. And that was a really beautiful thing to sort of be invited into that. The big takeaway with me from that, I think we're so scared and precious at the same time about trans identity. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I felt a real sense of invitation from that community was the idea of trans identity as a way of a means of play, and a serious means of play. But the idea that, you could ask the question, what are your pronouns today? Right. And that's partly a thing of acknowledging that these are things that can change and shift, and you can try different things, but you can try different things. You don't have to be locked into one way of being in the world, which is how you've been raised or how you're perceived or anything like that.
And society is constantly telling you, I can't handle, what is it? You can't change. We're also, we I don't know, we seem to crave these clear markings, but that's not how people are.
Different expressions. I'll always remember one of my first jobs. My boss was so concerned because her son, who was 11 or 12 at the time, she had all the trainings about what to do if your kid is gay, what to do if your kid is trans. But her kid was just a cat. He wanted to go to school in cat ears and a tail. And she was just he's going to be bullied, but this is what he wants. It's his self-expression, but he's not a cat. But if he says he's a cat, is it she was just so concerned about it. It's this child who is playing, who is exploring different ways of expressing himself. And what a great thing to make space for and to make permission for. And of course, as a parent, to want to protect your kid and to want to make sure that they're not doing stuff that's going to have lasting scars, but also, okay, he's a cat. Cool.
Yeah.
That's fun.
He doesn't seem to have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. But how did it, you said it sort of resonated with your own queer identity. It brought up feelings about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was because through all of this, and this is the real tea, through all of this kind of poetry practice, part of what I'm doing is I'm putting my own story aside to inhabit the stories of strangers. Yeah. And there is something, I think, very queer about that, very passing, very all of these things.
Code switching, I'll be this person for this audience. I can be this person for that audience.
And within that, I wasn't necessarily, I very much came of age online.
Right.
All of my earliest interactions with queer community were on the internet. It's really taken me, honestly, into my 30s to have a stable, physical, in-person, queer community of interest that isn't solely based around sexuality, but is a community of interest with that in common.
Yeah.
And I'd go out to some of the bars and stuff sometimes in my 20s, but that was never really my scene, and I never felt super at home there necessarily.
Right.
And there was something to this idea of what it looks like to cultivate an intentional space and to be able to cultivate a space that is kind of predicated on an identity, but more so predicated on an interest or an activity. So it was really in the wake of that trip that I started Pride Poets, which is now in its 5th year.
Ooh, tell me about that. What is that?
It's a project that I do with the city of West Hollywood, where I bring 20 LGBTQ plus poets every year out to West Hollywood Pride with typewriters. And we write about 500 poems a year for people at Pride. And just provide, I always say that it's Pride for introverts, because there's the partying and there's the throw a ball and get a shirt and there's all the hype up activities. And then we have our booth where you come in, you keep discussion with the poet, you tell them what's going on with you, they poem. And I mean, talk about tradition. Like, one of my favorite things this last year, again, now going on year 5, is people coming and saying, I've been getting a poem from you guys since my first Pride.
Wow.
This is part of this celebration. This is part of how I mark this. This is the part of the physical thing that I bring back from Pride and hang in my house as a reminder of my identity and my expression and permission, right? Permission to be who I am.
Yeah, where I was at in that journey. Like, it's really, I can imagine looking at them, comparing them to each other, and it's very meaningful. One of your cohorts, you talk about the network of people that do what you do, and that you all seem to, and the way you write about it is very supportive, but somebody said, I talk to somebody until I see myself in them, and then I know I can write. And I was like, oh, that resonates. That makes sense to me. When you do a session of this, is it draining at the end? Are you like, wow, that's a lot of emotion, that's a lot of thought, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, on average, I will write for 3 to 4 hours, up to 5 sometimes, but I try not to. And I tend to write about 30 poems in that time, which is a chapbook. Like, that is a book of poems.
Yeah.
And yeah, at the end of it, I don't want to talk. I feel like I have used up all of my words, and I can it can be tough too, because I'll get home from a gig, and my partner will want to talk about our days, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm done talking and I'm done listening for right now.
Yeah.
I've used both of those things to capacity.
Yeah.
And we need to sit quietly and do a third thing.
Maybe eat.
And then later on I can
process
some of that sense. But yeah, it's emotionally draining. It's physically draining. Super rewarding. And I think it's a muscle in a way. I think I'm good at it now, in the sense that I mean, even, all of my stuff is already in the car. So to go out when I'm going out to a gig or to write, I just put on a t-shirt and I change there.
Yeah.
And so it really is this sense of I put it on there, I take it off there, and can compartmentalize it a little bit in that way. And then you'll get stories like the one that I shared with you with that poem, that's going to stick with me, and that's going to keep bouncing around my head for a little while.
As I was reading about your journey in starting to do this, being a rent poet, and then when the corporate piece came in, I was like, yes, get that corporate money. Because I don't know if we talked about this when we did homework together, but I co-created this party game called You Don't Know My Life, and I started hosting virtual game nights during the pandemic, and now most of my clients are corporate people, probably the same people that hire you. And I was like, yes. And and ka-ching, I don't know the other way to get the ka-ching. So I was very happy to see you go in that direction. And the weddings, yes, because it's hard, right? And I was like, yes, get those rich people's weddings in Bel Air, yes. Cash those checks. I don't know I'm not sure what my question is, but I was like, it feels like, I don't know, maybe it's always been hard to make money as an artist, but I think with the digitization of everything, it's harder still. Musicians, all that stuff. You need, Salesforce to pay you a bunch of money that's in their budget for HR. That's what you need.
I think that the thing that I'd want to say about that is I think that so many artists who I talk to have this, I want to call it a bugbear. That feels very antiquated. Where is that from? I have to look at the etymology of bugbear now.
Yeah.
I have a bugbear about selling out. Everyone's so scared that they're going to sell out.
This was a big conversation in the 90s among my writer people, because you could actually get by and not sell out. Now you're like, where do I go to sell out? Where's the selling out booth? I will sign me up.
That was, I think in some ways the success was in that first month saying, listen, my explicit goal is to pay my rent with this. Yeah. I am attempting to sell out as quickly and as thoroughly as possible.
Right. You were clear about it.
And within that idea of you can find what's ensold in the kitsch. You can find what's ensold in the selling out. And
you have those moments of grace all the time at bridal showers. And it's breathtakingly beautiful, I think.
And it's lovely too, because it's not like I'm just having to write an ode to the wedding couple and how great they are. Like, I'm sitting with their mom, I'm sitting with their cousin, I'm sitting with their 5-year-old niece. Like, I'm having interactions with all of these people who are sharing their real stories. And like weddings, especially, like weddings bring up so many emotions for everyone.
Yeah.
Have a space at a wedding to sort of be able to process all of that.
Right. To be the last bridesmaid that hasn't gotten married yet, sitting down at your thing. And she's dropped all this money on all these fucking gifts and dresses.
Exactly.
She has a story to tell. There are other chapters in your book. You go to Ecuador to work with actors. There's a beautiful story and a heartbreaking story about a poet who is in prison, seeking asylum, an immigrant, and just like so many places your writing has taken you. Do you ever sit back and go, wow, these are worlds that I would never have known if I had just gotten a job somewhere?
Oh, yeah. And at the same time, like I've had to learn, and this is really a new thing as of last year, like learning to travel for fun. Because one of the things that I do not get is vacation time.
Right.
And so it's been a really beautiful thing to try to arrange my life in such a way that I can go and work in lots of different places. And I love having LA as a home base, and I love being able to kind of sally out from here and I don't know, like live on an island for a couple weeks in the Boston Harbor, or, ride the train around the country for a month. Like those things are weird ways of experiencing reality that really appeal to me.
Yeah.
And at the same time, to be able to just like go on vacation with friends feels so novel.
Right.
And
right.
So
you don't
special.
have a gig. You don't have, you don't have to get up tomorrow and go to the street fair and you're just there to have fun.
And we're just, we're going to spend a quantity of money, and the purpose of that money is enjoyment, and it doesn't have to be paid for with other things. There doesn't need to be a grant and a fellowship and a corporate sponsor and an underwriter and a whatever. And it's, it's taken a decade of doing this to be at the point in my artist career where I'm like, oh, I think
I can swing this. I can allow myself to do this, and I can make it work.
But I mean, you talked about the flight attendant love story earlier, and when I was in college, we had a close family friend who was a mechanic for American Airlines.
Okay.
And
wait, say that part again. It kind of got cut off.
He was a mechanic for American Airlines, and he put me on his fly list.
Oh, wow.
So I was able to, from the time I was 18 to 22, I could fly standby anywhere in the world for $100 for first class.
Wow.
Which spoiled me, number one. That was a lot of ice cream sundaes.
Right. You got the fresh cookies every time. Cookies all of us could smell in the back, but we would
champagne on takeoff. I mean, I wasn't always first class, and I did sleep in an airport for 3 nights at one point. So like it wasn't all rose, but that was so much of my kind of adolescence, young adulthood. In part because of that, I ended up going to college in Scotland for 4 years. I did internships in Costa Rica and Korea and China. I really lived internationally for my young adulthood. And so in some ways, the travel feels very natural and very how I want to live my life. And it was also it was like flying for free and I was on couchsurfing.com. I was staying in hostels. And in some ways, this is another chapter right now. I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm like learning how to travel like a grown-up,
Yeah.
Learning how to like pack a suit and stay at a hotel.
Yeah.
And that also feels like weird and novel, but exciting and interesting to think about how that, again, can be ensouled and interesting.
Yeah. What have you learned about America through doing this?
I mean, we talked before about this sort of this epidemic of loneliness and this idea of a longing to be heard in a very sadistic, slightly scary way. I think the second Trump presidency is going to be great for the book. I think that there's something that we need to hear in it. When it came out in June of 2020, mid-pandemic, during the Black Lives Matter summer. And a friend, actually the real estate friend, who I met in the country, said, I bet you didn't think your book would be science fiction when it came out. Because at the time when none of us were able to even leave our houses, let alone travel and write poems for strangers and have
strangers. Yeah.
And I think that we're sort of back in a weird way to this world where I wrote the book, where it's coming from. And I think that, everything changes and nothing changes. I think a big thing for me is this idea of meeting people where they're at and talking to people about priorities. I think that because of the way that our information landscape is cut up now, we're talking a lot about, for example, what bathroom people use.
Yeah.
Why? Literally, that is a manufactured talking point.
Yeah.
Aside from the people who need to use the bathroom, no one cares about that.
Right.
Zero people.
No one's laying awake at night worried about something happening.
People have ever sat down and I've said, what do you need a poem about? And they've said, oh, well, it's this political situation.
Right.
None of them.
I'm worried about the caravan that's coming here. Yeah. Like, no, that's not what happens.
Right. And I think that because there is, because we have like a for-profit sensationalist news ecosystem, the stories that end up getting amplified are stories of fear and discord that actually don't reflect what's going on for the most part in people's day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the things that are going on at a larger scale do have real ripple effects through those lives and real implications. And so I think there's like maybe a return to basics, a return to priorities that's needed in terms of getting back to, and the classic election thing is always like, it's the economy, stupid, right?
Right.
But that's because we're in a capitalist country and it's a signifier for something else. It's a signifier for, are people able to do what they want? Are people able to live comfortably? Are people able to see their families?
Yeah.
And that's it. 10% of all the poems I write are poems about people's dogs. Yeah. That's what people care about. Yeah. That's actually what poems are.
What's the craziest thing somebody told you to write a poem about? Was there something ever really oh, that's quirky?
Every now and then people will try to stump me or challenge me, and that's always fun.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
I like it when people have their own poems. They're like, I wrote this. And I'm like, cool, do you want me to read it? And then I'll base whatever I'll respond to it in mind. That's always fun.
Yeah.
No one's ever confessed a murder or something. And
I killed my wife and nobody knows. Do people ever hit on you? Is it ever loaded in that way?
Yeah, it's funny because it's very much like it's interesting that you asked that. A lot of times people are like, "Oh, I bet the girls love you."
Yeah, with that cute little hat, that cute little vest, and you're just like a sweet listener. You listen, yeah. Got to meet my daughter.
Such a nice young straight man.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mostly don't correct them because I don't.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah. That's not part of the thing we're doing. I mentioned to you beforehand if you would feel comfortable writing me a poem and doing your thing, and you said you'd be open to it. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see.
Okay, I'm pretending I'm walking up to your thing at an event.
All right, we have a Imperial Good Companion.
Okay.
For the writing.
Yes.
And so what I would ask is just, Dennis, what do you need a poem about today?
I think that this is an uncertain time, not just in the world, but in my life. I feel that I am being the person I'm meant to be and struggling to find a market for it. Questioning if there was some other road I should have taken, some safer road. I'm seeing peers retire. I'm seeing peers, or not peers in terms of what we pursued, but people my age. And I never saw another off-ramp. I picked this, and yet it's a struggle, and more so than it was last year and the year before. So yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why more than last year and the year before?
I had a writing gig in the 2 previous years that ended, so that was my biggest chunk of income, and I haven't been able to replace it. But I like what I'm about. I like this work that I'm doing. I like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. So just struggling to find a place to be, if it makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think it totally does.
Yeah.
Within the context of that, I don't know, that anxiety, do you have somewhere that you go or something that you do when you're kind of feeling uncertain that gives you maybe not like a feeling of direction, but gives you a sense of it's all going to be okay? Well,
I was taking stock of the last year, which we often do at the end of years, and something happened this year that was unexpected. And I'm a dancer. I used to dance in my 20s, and I did work a bit professionally doing that, cruise ships for 5 years. Anyway, I've gotten back into it, and I got a dance agent. So I go out on these auditions for mature dancers. And it's something that I haven't booked anything yet, but last night was the mixer party for my agency, and I'm there with all the young dancers that are dancing with like Sabrina Carpenter and like Paula Abdul's tour, and I'm like fanboying out on them. And so there's this thing that's come back from my past that when I look back on the year, I can go, wow, that was an unexpected joy development, right? So that's a thing.
What was your genre of dance?
Like jazz, like, mostly jazz, some hip hop. I didn't do much ballet or contemporary or a little bit of tap, but mostly like, jazz and hip hop. So now I get like self-tape auditions for Jardians and like, you know, on cable news where it's all old people dancing around about a medication. That could be me if I play my cards right. But it's something that like it lights me up in a way. It brings me joy. It's brought me some new friends, and it's really unexpected. But it hasn't solved the problem. I'm at that age where I'm like, okay, how did they make their money? Where's their money coming from? Like, you look at everybody like that, and like, how are they getting by? And I had coffee with a friend recently who is HIV positive, and at a certain point wasn't sure they would get to be an older person, but they got a job in a corporate setting and stuck with it, and they are set. They are good to go. And he said to me, he goes, I was playing the long game and I didn't know it. And I was like, oh, ow, like, good for you, but I am not set up for, but I picked it, one of the things I sometimes say is I followed my bliss, but my bliss didn't know where it was going. But where I'm landing now is I'm trying to turn that from something that feels sad or even tragic into something that feels like kind of awesome in a way. If I can ride it, if I can hang in and stay the course in a way, or because I've also spent time with people who spent their lives doing something they didn't like. And the regret, you could feel it wafting off of them. And it's really painful. I was true to myself, and I've done the life that I want. Also, if it ended tomorrow, it would kind of be a relief. So that's where I'm at. So you've got 16 lives to solve my life. Go.
That's it. We're almost there.
Really? Have you even been typing? I haven't heard any types.
Oh, yeah. I've been typing.
You've been typing this whole time?
I absolutely have.
Wow. All right. Yeah.
This it's funny. This typewriter,
and I think it's part of why I cry easily is because I'm hyper attuned in a way. Like I don't know. There's something I find the beauty in things very moving. The things that make me cry are connections. I think that's why so many parts of your book is so moving to me. Because what you do, friendship stories, movies like that, where people are. I don't always cry at the sad parts of somebody dies. I cry about connection. Right? Yeah.
Okay, that's the ending. That's it.
All right. Wow. Okay, then you read it. I might add some sound effects in here for like type D, type, but I can see your shoulders going. I think that's good.
It's supposed to, you can't hear it. I wonder if it's...
Yeah, that's okay. Maybe it's my, I've really stepped up my sound quality in this endeavor, I hope. So...
All right.
Here it goes. And you're holding up a little index card. It's really cute. I like it. I think I want to take a picture of the screen of you. Let me see if I have... Oh, I can do a screen grab. Okay, hang on one second while we do this. Okay, wait. All right.
In the screen
there's the thing. Okay, there it is. And before we do this, before I let you go, I want to make sure that if somebody wants a poem from you for a gift or something, do you do like people reaching out like that, or do you have to be in an event?
I do. Yeah, no, I do. I do online commissions. My Instagram is @rentpoet or rentpoet@gmail.com.
Right.
Rentpoet.com. All good ways to reach out, and I am always excited to hear people's stories and to write for them.
That's awesome. So people can do that for a gift. Like normally I do a gift guide episode in December, but I didn't have those. I didn't come across, those kinds of things this year, but this is a wonderful idea. So, all right. You can get a poem for a loved one from Brian. Okay.
Dennis?
What's that?
Are you ready for your poem?
I am ready for my poem. And I might get emotional. Here we go.
This is for Dennis. Uncertain as meaning, no market in struggle. You can't retire off that. Who retires anymore? From love, self. When you're a dancer, you'll always be a dancer. When the music plays, the rhythm tells your body what to do. Nothing solves a body's problem, a choice or a tragedy, where the only thing certain is how we connect.
Wow. Thank you for that. That was really beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that. That's exciting. That's exciting that you're returning to things. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of seasonality.
Yeah.
That like we did for most of human existence, we didn't live in one place. We lived in different places in different seasons, and we did different things in different seasons, and the ways that I can cultivate that in my own life. And I love that you're coming back to dance.
Well, I have friends or people around me that feel like they're kind of wrapping it up. And I'm not set up for that in terms of livelihood. And also it's not where my heart is. Like I'm still, so it's an interesting time. Let's just put it that way. That was really beautiful. So is there anything else that, apart from the book, people should pick it up? The audiobook is what I listened to. It was beautiful as well. The Poetry of Strangers. Just so much in the book that we didn't get to talk about, but a lovely odyssey. And you mentioned your Instagram and your website. Anything else you want to get a mention in for? Yeah,
I've got a new chapbook of poetry that came out last year called Maze Mouth. That's all about kink and death. So
right on.
The Poetry of Strangers feels very optimistic and sanitary to you, and you want something a little more grungy, and there's like poems in there like Death is Kind of a Dick, and there's one all about pups and fisting. So that's available.
Right on.
And I've got a show called The Infinity Show, which is kind of my 10-year retrospective that I'm doing actually on December 13th and then again in March of next year.
Oh, awesome.
Center. And that's...
Where is it at?
At the LA LGBT Center. They have a theater.
Awesome. Okay, excellent.
An artist in residence for them this year, part of the first cohort that they've been supporting, and that's been really phenomenal to get to go through. And it's an interactive show with the audience. So kind of what I just did with you in terms of getting a topic for a poem and then writing it.
Right.
Imagine that with a lot of people over the course of an hour with a mix of storytelling and clowning and reading from different things. It's a lot of fun.
You're a real go-getter. Like you start programs, you build community, you apply for grants and fellowships and gigs on Amtrak, right?
I'm tired, Dennis. I'm so tired.
I relate to that so much. I can't tell you. Yeah. The other day, this is dark, but I'm going to share it. Could have been in my poem. I was walking my dog, and there was this this Escalade pulled up, kind of by my condo unit, and started to pull in. And it was kind of one of those trucks in movies that are bad guy cars, right? And I thought somebody could just roll down their window and shoot me right now, and I'd be like, "What if that happened?" And my first thought would be like, it would be such a relief. I was like, I get to be done? Like, but that's dark. I would leave my dog behind. And also that's very dark. And I think I might cut this whole section out. But,
no, you gotta run a, what was it? Healthcare insurance company for that to happen.
Right. Exactly. That's who you need to be in this world for that to go down like that. Anyway, here's my final thought. You write about this a lot in the book, but how would you describe what this being a rant poet has brought to your life? How would you be different if you weren't doing this?
Oh man, I might be like, might have a 401k.
Thank you. Yeah,
true.
You might be playing the long game and not knowing it. And it's not like these people that are like set, good to go. It wasn't like they were super disciplined about it. They just kind of like, oh yeah, I was an assistant and then I just stayed.
Yeah, you happen into things so often. I mean, so everything that I do is I've shot for something and I've wound up slightly to the left. Like when I came back to LA, I wanted to direct theater.
Right.
And I worked on that for a couple of years, and I was coming from the UK where theater is a much, much bigger deal. And sort of took about a year to get the lay of the land and went, this isn't a career. There's not the economics to make this make sense as a way to earn a living.
Yeah.
And wound up in poetry, which ironically, the one thing less practical. But with fewer startup costs. Maybe
right.
that's
But you're making it work. Are there people – do you ever get more established people that look down on what you do? Do you ever feel that vibe?
It's something I wonder as I get older. And I think about that a lot where I'm like, I was 25 when I started, and it was adorable. I was like a little child writing poems, very precocious.
Right.
He has such big words. Good for him. I'm 35 now. And yeah, I wonder, when I'm 45, 55, 65, if that's something that will work. And so honestly, the place that I'm in right now, kind of as you're talking about, I'm working on institutionalizing. I'm thinking very intentionally about what does it mean to build partnerships? What does it mean to work with like established cultural institutions?
Right. You also teach extension courses at UCLA, I understand. Yeah.
And I do a lot of teaching. Yeah, that's a big piece of it right now for me as well is doing that teaching. And it's wonderful, and I love being able to give back. And it's also, also draining. It's time for my creative work because I'm working with students, but I do feel like it's an extension of the typewriter work, which is so much about making people feel like they sit down with me, they say, I don't know what I want a poem about. And then they tell me, and then they say, oh, I'm boring. And I think that's such a tragedy.
I get that sometimes when I'm hosting my games, people feel like they're not, it makes me sad when that happens. And I always try to spin it or make it okay. But they're like, oh, my answer's boring, or I don't have it, it doesn't happen a lot, but I know that feeling when people, it makes you want to bring something special out of people. You don't want them to feel bad about themselves.
They want to give you the right stuff, like we're so conditioned to give the right answer.
Right.
And when you have a sandbox to play in, it can be hard for them. And I think that's the core of what I hope, when I'm teaching, there's elements of craft and stuff that I can give, but really what I'm there for is do the same thing I do at the typewriter, which is just to say, you're not boring. Your story is important. It's worth being down. It's worth being shared. Maybe not right away.
It's worth something. Right.
Yeah,
it's worth something, which is what that at the end of your reading said. It's like the things that I do between the interviewing and things like that. When I'm doing them, I feel like I'm doing the right thing. Like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Do you get that feeling when you're writing poems for people?
Yeah, and I just finished this 3-year tenure about a year ago now as the poet laureate for West Hollywood. And so I was doing a lot of work in making like literary spaces, particularly in queer spaces. We ran an open mic at Mickey's, the historic gay bar, for a while. And I had a mentor kind of at the end of that who said, great, you've done your work, for the community. Now it's time for you to focus on your own work. Mm-hmm. And that's hard.
It is hard. Like you write poems, some event for hours, and then you go home and you have your passion project that's your thing. I would imagine it might be harder to get into it. Maybe not.
And it's easy, it's easy in a way for me to tell everyone, yes, your story is important, your story matters. Then it comes time for me, and I'm like, well, what's your story that matters? And I'm like, I don't know if I have anything. And so that's my part of my present moment is working on a new project and pushing through that imposter syndrome, which is not present at the typewriter, but is totally present once I'm at a laptop.
Isn't that interesting? Wow. Well, whatever you do, I'm looking forward to seeing it, and I will be a big fan of it, I'm sure, because I just think you're remarkable. What you do and who you are and how you come across in the book, and I love my poem. I'm really touched by it. How am I going to get it in my hands? We'll have to do homework again, and you can bring it to me.
That sounds good. I have it here. I'll keep it on the desk.
Keep it handy.
It's typewriter. The ribbon in that typewriter is a little old, but you'll be able to read it.
It's part of the charm. I love it.
Part of the charm.
Awesome, Brian. This was great. Thank you so much. A real gift. So thank you for this conversation.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks again to Brian Sonia-Wallace. Pick up his book, The Poetry of Strangers. What a wonderful guest. And he wrote me that beautiful poem. Christmas came early this year, and after we logged off, Brian told me that he just got an email that he's going to be bringing his show, The Infinity Show, to Palm Springs on January 15th. So if you're out there, I think it's at the library or somewhere out there, but just look it up or follow him on Instagram, but bringing it to the desert. All right. So this happened. I'm just going to tell you what I did last night. I had 2 events to go to. One was the holiday mixer for my dance agency, Block. And first of all, I just love saying I have a dance agency. I'll do it anytime I can. Have not booked a gig yet, but I've had some fun on and occasionally humiliating auditions, and that's what it is. That's the gig. But it was a really fun event. We were at this place called the All Seasons Brewing, which is on Wilshire and La Brea, and it used to be like a Firestone store, so it's kind of got that vibe, but it's just a fun kind of bar atmosphere. But anyway, I got to hang out with some of the older, mature dancers that I'm part of the category. Still the only guy, interestingly. It was me and the ladies, which is kind of how it was back when I started taking dance classes in college. And but I spent half the party stalking young dancers that I've seen on pop tours. So there's a guy named Billy Mustafa that was one of Paula Abdul's dancers, and I was like, "You worked with Paula," and so I was a little fanboy with him. And also, he was, if you remember, when RRR's song Natu Natu won Best Song at the Oscars, and they did that big number, he was one of the 2 main Natu Natu guys. So of course, I had questions, and he said he got to meet the actors who I love and that they were very cool, the actors from RRR, and that Paula was sweet. And I was like, you know what? She did not phone in that tour. It had a vision, and she worked so hard, and you guys looked amazing, and he was very sweet. And then there's another guy named Peter Pinnock, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, who dances now with Sabrina Carpenter, and I'm a fan of his. And he was super sweet, too. So I'm just stalking these tour boys. And I'm like, I'm old enough to be their grandfather. But it's fun. Anyway, that was fun. And then I went and saw my recent podcast guest, Hugh Panaro, do his cabaret show, Man Without a Mask, at the Catalina Jazz Club. And I just can't remember seeing a vocal performance in person that was that stunning and peerless. And it's not just like his high notes where he has power. Like, he'll end a song with a low part of his voice, and it's the final. Like, he is so good. People just should throw money at him all day long to sing. Like, all day, just random people, big companies, like symphony halls. Just, man, what a gifted singer, and just so nice. We got to say hello afterwards. I brought my friend Matt Zarley, who knew Hugh from a performance that they had done together years ago, and it was a big love fest, and he could not have been nicer. And, I was sitting there going, this is happening. I'm here in this wonderful show because of this podcast. So it's a really enriching thing when you have those nights. And if you ever get a chance to see him sing, I hope he does more shows, because I guess from the interview I gathered that he hadn't done a lot of this kind of stuff. It's relatively new to him, and he needs to do it. People need to hear him sing, whether he's in a Broadway show or not. He's so gifted and sweet and handsome and charming and all the other adjectives. All right, that's enough for this week. It's a long one, but thank you. I appreciate you guys listening. I want to give a shout out to Oscar Rosario for mixing the episodes. My theme music is by Mark Daniels for Replacement Music. Catch you next time on Dennis Anyone. Bye.